Well, thank you, Mr Chair, and tēnā koutou katoa, Mayor and Councillors. So Monday, a week ago, the government announced its proposals around rates capping, which had been signalled in various forms for some time. What we're presenting here, and it's Mitchell Shaw who's done a lot of the work with the support of Bruce, our Head of Finance. What we're presenting here is some modelling that has been done to bring to attention the implications and some of the numbers around it. So with that, I'll hand over to them to walk us through the presentation.
Good morning, councillors.
Good morning.
Bring it this slide. Lost batteries. There we go. All right. So today we will run you through rates capping. We'll start with a brief background on where rates capping and its current iteration has come from. We'll then move to the actual announcement that was made on the 1st of December. At that point, we'd like to stop for questions on those sections. We will then move into some worked examples on the impacts of rates capping on council's finances, other key considerations, at which point we'd like to stop for questions again on those sections, and we will then move into the submission process, considerations, and the next steps for council. So, the background to rates capping. Over the last few years, the government has made several mentions to a cost of living crisis and the pressure on households. In August 2024, the Minister for Local Government released a statement around back to basics for local government. The key points in that statement were that council rates were increasing by around 15% on average across the country, which was more than 4 times the rate of inflation. They also made mention that they wanted councils to be doing everything they could to reduce pressure on ratepayers. They also mentioned as part of that document that they would be looking at options around capping revenue to councils to protect ratepayers and control expenditure on pet projects and nice-to-haves. Around a year later, in July 2025, the Minister for Local Government issued the Local Government Systems Improvement Amendment Bill. While this was initially marketed as a rates capping bill, there was no rates capping within it. However, it did refocus the council on core services to respond directly to public frustration over deteriorating infrastructure, rising rates, and a lack of financial focus. They also mentioned in their media release that they were working at pace on a rates cap model. Within the bill itself, while there was no explicit provisions on rates capping, within the explanatory notes they did make mention that they were reviewing rates capping systems, potentially in line with the New South Wales rates peg model. It's also worth noting that around this time the Reserve Bank issued a media release stating that around the impact that rates were having on increases to CPI. On the 31st of July 2025, the Minister for Local Government issued another statement around stronger accountability for rates. They released metrics on councils on their financial measures and once again called for getting back to basics and the delivering of essential services and infrastructure, and once again pointed out that they were exploring a rates capping system. So over the last year, there's been a theme out of central government when discussing the rates cap, which is that the rates caps are not discussed individually. They're always a part of larger government reform and policy. There's been a push to get councils to focus on core service delivery and back to basics, and they would like to use a control on rates to help limit the cost of living. So, come the 1st of December 2025 at 4 p.m, the government officially announced its rates capping policy. The key components of that rates cap are a 2 to 4 increase limit on rates per year. The rates cap would exclude water charges and water targeted rates and other non-rates revenue. From 1 July 2027, so our next LTP, councils would be required to consider the impact of the rates cap, a transition phase. The rates cap would take effect from 1 July 2029, so FY30, and exceptions could be applied for in exceptional circumstances. The definition that they've used for exceptional circumstances is global financial crisis and significant natural disaster. So out of that announcement, council staff have had a number of questions where there's lack of clarity within the documentation provided. The first key one is the rates cap a nominal rates cap increase or an increase to existing ratepayers? When we present our rates increase numbers, we typically release them as an increase to existing ratepayers, the amount the ratepayer could expect to see increasing on their bill itself if they stayed within the same property. So for example, the 2025-26 annual plan had an increase to existing ratepayers of 6.6%. A nominal rates increase, on the other hand, is the increase in the total, percentage increase on the total revenue that council collects from rates, so a purely numeric example. And for the 25-26 annual plan, that was an 8.52% increase. It effectively strips out the effect of growth. Our initial view is that the rates cap is a nominal rates cap rather than allowing for growth on top of it. The basis for that is the wording calculations that they have provided. The upper band of 4% is on the basis of allowing for growth.
So just so I've got it clear in my very simple mind, the difference between the 6.6 and the 8.52 is just growth?
Correct.
Yeah, cool.
Next key questions that we have on the announcement is the rates cap on each individual rate charged by council or on the total revenue collected by council rates? So the council has a number of different targeted rates and general rates. Each of them capped to 4%, or is it just the total revenue collected from all rates that's capped to 4%? Our initial view is that it will be based on the overall rates revenue take, given the complexity around enforcing it on a rate-by-rate basis and the limitations that would place on councils when setting up new rates in the future. What does the transition phase mean, and how strictly will that period be enforced? In the announcement that was made, the Prime Minister and Local Government Minister talked about the need for councils to observe the transition period, and that councils who didn't could be subject to commissioners. Our belief is that we will need to show in our upcoming LTP an approach to getting our rates down to 4%, and they wouldn't be expecting to see significant rates increases in that period over and above the rates cap. Is the rates cap based on the prior annual plan or LTP budget or on the previous actual strike? As many of you will know, we often have a small rates over strike each year due to late growth in the rating base. It's unclear at this stage whether the rates cap would be applied on that number or a previous budgeted figure. If there were to be part mergers from the regional council or other district councils, how would the rates base be assessed for a rates capping? And what would qualify as a reason for a temporary adjustment post 1 July 2029? At the moment, they've only said exceptional circumstances. However, they haven't defined how that will be determined in this situation. So if there are some questions, we'd be happy to take them.
Hey, thank you for that, and it's a really good explanation of how it sort of works through, and I guess our initial view on it. So there'll be more that comes through later. So I really appreciate the work, and it's good we can do it here so that the public watching can see as well. I've got Tyler, Victoria, and then Yanni.
Kia ora, guys. I just wanted to get some clarity around the way this is modelled, and there's multiple indices which we use to assess what the inflation looks like, which is a mix of GDP, general inflation, but the one that stands out for me is the construction cost index. Do we take into account any of that, and is that different to the general inflation that the rates cap is talking about?
So when we build our budgets for the LTP and annual plan, we apply an inflation index to the numbers to bring it up to current valuations. We use Burl's numbers to produce that inflation index, which is weighted according to the activities that our council actually undertakes. The Burl index is largely built off the producer price index and other known costs and indices that are available for local government costs. The rates cap that has been built by central government uses an underlying assumption based on CPI inflation instead, which is the consumer price index, so a basket of goods that a typical household would purchase rather than a business.
So the CPI doesn't actually correlate very well with our Burl index?
It is not a fully equivalent measure.
No. And do you know the difference in percentage between those two?
Not off the top of my head, sorry, Councillor.
Okay. Would we be able to get some information for that? I think that would be really valuable for public knowledge to understand exactly what that looks like. And the next quick question I've got is related to that rates cap and what we're looking towards 2027. We're obviously going to be taking water away from that. Do we know the current rates take from water in the capital program and even in OPEX?
Yes, we do, Councillor.
What's the percentage?
It's around 40 to 50% each year.
Oh, wow. Okay. And from the wider rates percentage, so for example, we've got looking at 8% for the 2026 year, we're not going to be separating water between now and then, right?
No, that is correct, Councillor.
Great, thank you.
Sorry, did you say 40 to 50? Can you just talk me through that a bit more?
So, of our total rates that the council collects, 40 to 50% each year is applied to the water services, either direct operational expenditure, the rating for renewals of the capital program, or the debt repayment and interest expense that has been incurred as a result of borrowing on behalf of the capital program for water services.
Again, in my simple mind, how does that translate? And so, if you've got an 8% rate increase, how does this? What does that look like in terms of the water? And you may not know today, but what does that look like in terms of if you took out the water? What does that look like as a general rate?
We will the modelling that we're upcoming to shows the results excluding water and the savings that would need to be provided.
Good as gold. Thank you. I've got Victoria.
Thank you. So as a sort of follow-on from Councillor McDonald there and the information you've given us in initial questions, you talk about our staff initial view on various questions, including the water. When are you expecting further clarification from the government on that to give us a little bit more certainty about what this looks like for us?
So the government is currently carrying out a consultation process to receive feedback on their document. We've also been provided a contact with the DIA to follow up with on any questions. So we're building up a full set of questions.
And have you had any feedback on your interpretation to date?
No, not to date.
And do you expect to get any feedback on your interpretation to date, or are you going to have to wait until this full feedback loop is completed?
I cannot speak for the DIA.
Yeah, thank you. It's great that you recognise that they did say there was an allowance for natural disaster. Obviously, Christchurch has had several, but most prominent is the earthquakes, which we're still having to recover from. Can you just clarify around any discussions with central government about whether we would be able to have any exemption based on the natural disasters that we've had historically that we're still paying for?
The initial release by the government when the Prime Minister and Minister for Local Government spoke to the rates capping. While the Christchurch example was not brought up, the recent flooding up north was discussed, and the Prime Minister's comments were that the council was expected to operate within the 2 to 4% cap. So it would likely be only for future natural disasters that the cap may be adjusted.
Right. And thank you for the really good explanation around the cost of the water services. Are we able to get the same figures for the earthquake infrastructure repairs that we're still paying for? Like, do we know how much of the current budget is going towards fixing the broken infrastructure and earthquake recovery costs?
That may be a little difficult to determine, just due to identifying whether a project was exclusively for the earthquake or only partially as a result of the earthquake, and splitting those costs may be difficult to determine at this stage.
But if we could just do the anchor projects
I
and
think
work
the
out.
answer is no. So have you got a different question? Because I've got Tyrone next.
We can't work out any earthquake related costs that we've got currently.
That's what they're telling us.
I just
As you could work out some not.
we could work out the anchor projects.
Sure, but they wouldn't help this exercise.
Okay, well, what about just take Te Kaha? What percentage of that
They're
is
not gonna
of the
let us
rates?
exclude to car.
There's potentially two parts to that question, in that there is part that those projects contribute to a rates increase versus how much of our total rates collection they contribute to. So for the Christchurch earthquake, for example, you are not likely to be experiencing rates increases at the moment as a result of them. And likewise, after while this year there is a rates impact of Te Kaha, that will decrease moving forward in terms of its pressure on increasing rates.
Okay, Tyrone.
Thank you. Yeah, I'm still a little bit unclear on the definitions around nice to haves and pet projects. Do we have a list of what they are, or is that a rhetorical device? I'm just not clear on that.
In terms of the nice to haves, we don't have a definition. What we do have is the Local Government Systems Improvement Bill, which defined core services, which included network infrastructure, so water services and transport, parks, recreational facilities, libraries, and there were a couple of others who escape me at the moment. Economic development.
Okay, it's still a bit woolly, but thank you.
Cool. Aaron.
Yeah, so how soon can we separate water out?
So we
Separate it out and start charging for water properly and separately, and because that's the model we're moving to. So do we have to wait until the last minute and do it then, or can we go early and?
So,
around volumetric chargings, probably we can get some advice from the water team at some later date.
Well, that's only the fresh water, but I'm picking once water's separated out, it's all three go, or only one go?
so the waters reform separation is currently underway. By 30 June 2028, we are required to have a financially sustainable and ring-fenced water service delivery. Because water services were retained in-house, there is no requirement for council to move to a volumetric charging. However, it may do so if it chooses to. In terms of the separation of waters, we're currently undertaking that work to get it ring-fenced and ensure it's completely separate from the rest of our finances. And our rating for water at the moment is primarily collected through Three Waters targeted rates, with the debt repayment portion of our water services still included within the general rate.
So you're saying that by 2028 we have to be doing it separately?
Yes, it has to be ring-fenced within our
Okay, and
financial.
I still haven't had my question answered, as given that water is a utility like electricity, gas, so on and so forth, can it be charged any other way than volumetrically?
Yes,
How?
it can be done on fixed charges. It can be done volumetrically, hourly basis. There's a number of different measures that the council could decide.
So then why is every other industry regulated to not be allowed to do that? Like, you can't just say, oh, electricity tiana are allowed to charge whatever they want because you're in the middle of nowhere, so we'll just ramp it because we can. You can't. There's limits to.
So we could come back with a discussion about that. I forgot that actually Mitch is our expert on water charging down the end because he was in the water transfer team and finance team. But if we can concentrate on rating today and then come back about these issues at the next workshop.
Okay. Do we know if the government's addressed that, or they've just?
No, the Commerce Commission will be.
Because we are an outlier, obviously.
The Commerce Commission will be sitting in over all water service delivery across the country, and will be carrying out a review on how water charges have to be implemented.
Right. Okay.
Okay, cool. Tim?
Thank you. How much feedback will they be asking from us with regards to the rates capping system? Because at the moment it seems they've only mentioned the New South Wales, but like Scottish Water, when the DIA came to us about Three Waters and used Scottish Water as the example to follow, which was ridiculous because they gave us no negative sides or risks, etc. It was pretty one-sided and done deal. Do we have a say? Because New South Wales, if you look at it, they have a different government system and they do have a large natural resource that they can feed off. So I'm just wondering, is it seen by you guys that they will be asking or giving us options to put up systems?
Yeah, we'll probably cover that later on in the submissions part of the session about what the government is asking us to respond to and what we will say.
Okay, thank you.
Just quickly, guys, I just probably wasn't clear, but I'm wondering if we were able to publicise, when you're ready, the difference between burial and CPI. It'd be really good to sort of publicise that and actually make that front-facing in terms of the struggles that obviously the council's going to have to be working through towards going into 2028.
Yep.
So just, looking at, for this year, we've got our inflation rate at 2.9 that we build in for the burial, and Te Kaha at 1.2, that takes us to 4.1. So without Te Kaha, we're sitting within the range. Is that the intention, actually, just saying to councils, you can only increase your rates by inflation, really? That's what you see as the intention?
I cannot speak to the intention of the central government.
Well, I suppose. Damn, I thought you might have been the one. Where I'm going with this is it's really not providing any scope for growth, and therefore we really need to really check our DC charges that they are adequate for enabling us to enable that growth to occur. Otherwise there's nothing left in the pot to do that. And yet at the same time we're being told to provide all this land for housing, 65,000 houses, and no ability to do it. Yeah. Anyway, I'm just flagging that really. It's more of a statement. Well, I did ask a question that he couldn't answer.
Right. No. I was just going to say the super city will fix it. Don't worry. There'll be a super city. Okay, do you want to jump through to the next bit?
Right, so we'll move on to the rates cap modelling. So this is a look at the impact of the rates cap on the council's financials. So quick disclaimer and the modelling assumptions that we've used for the slides that you're about to see. We've based it on the best information that we have currently available. It could potentially be changed or require update if there are any further central government legislation or policy updates. The underlying numbers that have been used are the 26-27 current build of the annual plan, which is our initial base build plus the CapEx deliverability review. So the around 8.5% you've seen previously, which results in a nominal rates increase of 9.6%. The rates cap is based on the previous year's budgets each time. The rates collected for water services have been excluded, and the council's credit rating and interest rates are not impacted by the imposition of a rates cap, which we'll come back to later. So in terms of a rates cap, we've got 4 scenarios that we've put up here. So the first scenario is a 4% cap commencing from FY30, which is the year that the rates cap is fully implemented in the government announcement. That would require a reduction in rates of $28.8 million in FY30, increasing to $62.2 million by 34. It's worth noting these numbers are cumulative. If the saving of $28.8 million was achieved in FY30, the year following, and that saving was permanent, the year following would be reduced by that $28 million. The 4% rates cap from FY27-28, so that would be our next long-term plan. If that was implemented, that would give that would be essentially, if the government required the transition period to have the full cap. It requires in FY28 a $28 million reduction in our rates collection, increasing to $122 million by 2034. The next scenario is a 4% rates cap phased in across the transition period, where our LTP slowly reduces to the 4% rates cap at a 6% cap, followed by a 5% cap, down to a 4% cap. In FY28, that would require an $18 million reduction in rates, increasing to $103 million by 2034. And then finally a 2% cap, so the bottom end of the cap that we've been provided from 27-28, which in FY28 would require savings of $37.9 million, increasing to $205.6 million. So between the 4% cap in 29-30 versus the 4% cap in 27-28, the delay of 2 years in the cap results in $60.2 million of rates being able to be collected between the two options, or the 4% cap from 28 compared to the 2% cap in 28, which would result in an additional $83.2 million reduction in our rates. So this is the previous slide graphed out. The black line there is our current projection of rates for non-water services with each of the individual models below. So as we move forward into the modelling, we will be primarily focusing in on the blue line, the phased entry, so the 654 rates reduction. So the key takeaways from here is that the lower the rates cap, the less the council is able to fund itself for our rates. At the moment, rates make up around 52% of the council's total funding. A 4% cap commencing in 27-28, by 2030, council rates would need to reduce by 12.6% from the current forecast, compared to a 2% cap commencing in that same year, where rates would need to reduce by 17.5%. The cumulative impact of the rates cap is significant and reduces the amount that can be collected over time. A 4% rates cap commencing in 27-28 would require rate savings of $28 million. To put that $28 million into perspective, in 2028, the net operational budget for recreation and sports is $28.4 million. And by 2034, a rate saving of $122.4 million would be required. That $22.4 million is the equivalent of the entire net operational budget for our communities and citizens' activities. So that's rec and sport, libraries, the arts centre, our service centres and the likes. The timing and implementation of the rates cap is significant. A 4% cap commencing in 27-28 is able to rate $60.2 million less in 2034 than one commencing 2 years later. That's $60.2 million, to put it once again into perspective. The parks budget in 2034, the net operational parks budget, is $53.7 million. And cost reductions or other funding sources will be required to achieve a rates cap, and temporary savings will not address the rates cap. They need to be permanently baked in, otherwise you will be chasing the saving each year following. So how could council address a rates cap at a high level? Reducing operational expenditure or increasing fees and charges would reduce rates at a dollar for dollar basis. So an $18 million reduction in operational expenditure would result in an $18 million reduction in the rates requirement of council. So applying our same transition phase entry for the rates cap in year 1, or 27-28, the year of the LTP, $18 million of savings would need to be found, increasing to $64.1 million by the time of the rates cap being fully implemented. And to put that $64.1 million into context, the libraries and rec and sport combined net operational budget is $66 million for that year. If the rates shortfall was to be exclusively addressed by increasing fees and charges, or unrestricted fees and charges, I should say, so the fees and charges that aren't set by central government or other regulatory bodies or aren't cost recovery activities, then the revenue on those items would need to increase by around 40%, which would likely impact the demand for those activities. So how does addressing rates capping by our operational budgets or fees and charges impact our key measures? From the nominal rates increase, you can see it decreases to the cap over time. Our balanced budget is largely unaffected as operational expense or revenue is being increased or reduced at the same rate rates are. However, our projected debt headroom does deteriorate due to the reduction in our overall revenue. So council is able to borrow based on its revenue earning potential at $2.80 for every $1 of revenue the council has. So a rates cap reduces our ability to borrow. If we were to address the rates cap via CapEx, it would not be possible. By 2034, we would require a negative capital program. So there would have to be some combination of CapEx and OpEx to address the rates cap. So the scenario you're seeing there is if rates were capped to $300 million, the capital program was capped on non-waters was capped to $300 million in all years. In the 27-28 year, that would require a $125.3 million reduction. To put that into perspective, that is the entire citizens and communities capital program, so libraries and rec and sport, plus the parks capital program would only come to $121.3 million. And by 2030, the reduction and the capital program would need to be $174.2 million, which is the equivalent of the transport capital program once the NZTA funding is removed. On top of that reduction, there would still need to be $36 million of operational savings identified, which is the equivalent of the library's budget for that year. In terms of how does using CapEx to address the rates cap impact our key financial benchmarks, over time we would come into line with the rates cap. Our balanced budget would be largely unaffected. However, our projected debt headroom would improve due to the reduction in the amount of borrowing that council is undertaking offsetting the loss of revenue. So the next option, you've probably been thinking, well, you've said we've got a healthy debt headroom, why can't we increase our borrowing or reduce ratings for renewals to address this? The answer is that will cost the ratepayer more in the long run, and when we come to the measures, you also see it there. So initially, in the first year, if rating for renewals was reduced, council would have to reduce them by $18.4 million compared to operational expenditure of a reduction of only $18 million. So that additional decrease in the rating for renewals or increasing borrowing is due to having to repay that debt and the additional interest expense that the council would incur due to increasing its debts. While in the first year it's only a $400,000 difference, by 2034 the council will have to increase its borrowing by $42.2 million over what it would have to find in operational savings. In addition, that increase in debt repayment and interest expense leaves less money left over in a rates capping scenario for existing services or core activities, meaning further savings would have to be identified. In terms of how that impacts our key budgets, our key benchmarks and metrics, while we would meet the nominal rates cap, you can see there the council would lose its balanced budget for the remainder of the LTP period and would struggle to return. Our projected debt headroom would also significantly deteriorate, limiting our ability to respond to natural disasters or significant events in the future. So some other key considerations that we need to consider when it comes to rates capping is the impact on the council's credit rating. Historically, councils have had stronger credit ratings and therefore lower interest rates due to their ability to increase rates as required to address expenditure or historic deficits or debt servicing requirements. With a rates cap, that will no longer be the case. If the council's credit rating were to be downgraded by 1 point, interest rates would increase by 0.05%, which would result in additional interest costs, which in a rates capping scenario would then result in additional savings having to be found in core services or activities. The council currently has a strategy to increase its rating for renewals to 100% by 2032. Those increases are more than 4% each year to achieve that target. This will put pressure on council to reduce rating for renewals. However, that will lead to additional interest expense and debt repayment costs, which will result in further savings having to be identified in core council services and activities. There's also the effect on the current annual plan, or the result of the current annual plan, how it affects us into the rates cap. If the council were to adopt an annual plan with a 6.5% rates cap, we would versus a 8.51%, our current position, that would decrease the council's ability to rate over time. So while in 27-28 that would reduce the amount of rates that the council could collect by 1 million, by 2034 that would decrease it to by 5.9 million due to the cumulative effect of the rates cap on the lower base rates. It's also worth noting that the council collects GST on rates and development contributions which are passed to central government. Some view this as a tax on a tax. In 2025-26, ratepayers will pay approximately $124.1 million of GST on the council portion of their rates invoice issued by Christchurch City Council, and developers will pay $3.4 million in GST on their development contributions. There is the question that if council was able to keep the GST on its rates and development contributions, would we still be able to claim the input credit on our expenditure, such as the capital program and our ongoing operational expenditure, which in some years may exceed the amount that we collect collect on our rates invoices. And if ratepayers were not charged GST, only residential ratepayers would benefit, as businesses are able to claim the GST on the rates that they pay. So we'll stop for questions if you have any on the modelling.
Excellent, thank you. That was again really good and really clear. I've got Nathaniel and then Tyrone, and then
Just a lot of the in-depth projections that you've got, we're looking at that 4% expected. I'm just wondering, if we go back to that slide where you had the 4% and also the 2% at the bottom there, if we get in the target band for inflation over the next few years, we could be looking at 2% inflation. So, just want to say hypothetically, if we were in that 2% with the $200 million hole in the budget by 2034, if we, in that year, 2034, if we closed all the libraries, all the parks, all of the art gallery, all the swimming pools, we would still be a good sort of 50 million away from filling that hole, wouldn't we?
I don't have the exact figures in front of me, but you are correct. The lower the rates cap, over time, the additional savings that would need to be found to address it.
Okay, thank you.
Tyrone.
Oh, thanks, Sam. So, do we have a sense of just thinking in terms of non-residential building work put in place in Christchurch? Do we have a sense of the proportion of Canterbury's spend in that sector that Christchurch City Council builds? I know you won't have that number off the top of your head, but is that information that we can find out?
Can you say that again? I don't get that. Yeah.
So in terms of the building work put in place in the Canterbury region in any given year, so non-residential, so buildings that we might build that built by council. Do we have a sense of what proportion of that council does compared to the whole of the Canterbury region? So how much of a player in that space are we actually? What's the volume that we physically build? So not horizontal stuff, not anything in the ground, but just buildings above the ground that we finance.
David's looking at me saying consenting numbers, so I don't know if that helps. Yeah.
We could probably work it out, I suppose. I just kind of was just wondering if there was a sort of a... Yeah, it doesn't
He's
matter.
right, the mechanism.
I was almost not going to ask that question, but yeah, anyway.
Cool.
I can probably figure it out. All right, thanks.
Aaron.
Yeah, it's interesting to put up examples of closing libraries, swimming pools and all those, but none of them compare to digital, and that's the biggest in the room, and we didn't put that up as an example of something we can carve into. Why is that?
The examples that were provided were not suggested cuts, they were just budgets that were close to the equivalent level of savings required. To put it into context, when we start talking in the millions, it can become a little abstract, and having something more tangible that people can see is a better example.
Right, and isn't the idea of the rates cap being put on councils, the entire purpose of this is we're rating beyond the rate of inflation, double, triple, year on year on year, that's compounding. The purpose of this is to get councils to start spending their money on what they can afford. So Toyotas instead of Ferraris, for instance. They're both a car, but they're quite different. And South Library's a Ferrari. The 10 Shirley Road's barely a Toyota. I'm not picking on that one,
No,
but
I suppose
it's a $32 million public facility. We can't keep spending like that. It's overspent. beyond its
We
purpose.
just got to the policy back at the beginning that was set out by Mitchell as to what's driving it, and all we're doing here is trying to contextualise what some of those numbers mean in terms of activities that are used by
Okay, but
residents and
when do we
ratepayers
put the magnifying glass on ourselves and go, okay, the commercial space is being built in Christchurch, the dearest are built by the council, and then hospitals per square metre are cheaper than facilities we build. Something's wrong, and that's what we should be addressing.
What's that?
What's that? No, hospitals are cheaper than the library. Yes, they were.
Okay, so
100%. I'll give you the numbers.
So let's not debate. We're doing so well.
No, but Sam, I
We can do
want
that.
examples of how we're going to get there.
We're going to do that in the next
Not-
session.
Oh, okay,
Yep,
cool.
yep,
Thank
yep.
you. No, thank you.
Cool.
Sorry.
Mark? I've
Thank
got
you.
Mark, Yanni, Tim, Tyler,
Um,
Kelly.
you mentioned there about the GST on rates and the likes. Have we done any work around Crown properties, if they were to pay rates on their properties, how that would add into this equation?
We don't have those numbers available at the moment. We should have an updated set shortly on that information.
Excellent, thank you.
Yeah, so I mean, we just opened Parakuri today. Effectively, within a couple of years, 2 years, we'd be looking at mothballing it to meet the rates cap. Is that kind of the takeaway?
The numbers that we provided are not suggested savings. They were just to contextualise the quantum of the saving that needs to be found.
Right, but the irony of the government coming down and talking about how wonderful this facility is, if the rates cap comes in, we'll effectively have to, I mean...
Is this a question?
Yeah, the question is, like, just from what I've heard you, to put it into context, it seems inevitable we would have to close some facilities. But I just cannot see what other way in terms of the operational budget could we achieve the rates cap.
It's through you, Mr. Chair. No, we're not suggesting anything of that kind at all. All we're doing is saying, here, as Mitchell said, by the time you start talking in these numbers, it becomes a bit abstract. We're just trying
Right.
to say, here's a service that people can understand what's delivered day to day. This is
I
what it costs, and that's all we're doing.
like-
We're not making any
So
suggestion.
Sure.
or
I mean, I
just to be
understand
clear,
that,
this
but-
is so you have the information to inform the submission that we will be putting into central government in response to this.
Yeah, thank you.
Your hard decisions will be in your LTP next
Sure.
year. That's where a lot, initially annual plan, but the big decisions will be in the LTP.
Just to understand, I guess what I'm just struggling to understand a little bit is there'll be things that we have control over that we can not do. We might not like not doing them, but there'll be things that we can make choices on. But there will also be things that we have to do as basic services, right? Like, I presume we'd have to continue consenting. We couldn't just say the operational cost of consenting, we're just not doing it.
Can we
Dog
sorry, I've let that go. Can we not get really into the weeds right now? We'll keep moving through and then
Sorry, what I was trying to understand at a high level
Yep.
is in terms of the things that, are there things that we have to do in terms of and what the cost is versus things that we have optionality around?
So what the team have tried, and I think they've said time and time again, they're just giving you contextual information about areas that are funded by rates. So some of those other areas are cost recovery
Right.
exercises. So we haven't gone into that depth. We can come back.
Sure.
We've got another presentation next
Okay.
week, and we will in the new year.
perfect. Tim?
Thank you. It'd be good in our submission to ask what they're looking at, because they have mentioned an example of just mentioning New South Wales. So New South Wales and Queensland do if you go to the pools there, etc., they are pretty close to user pays. The gyms, etc. You're paying serious money to go to gyms, etc. So it would be good for our ratepayers to know, if that were the case, and that's what we're looking, what would a pool visit cost, and what would a gym membership cost?
Tim, I think on that one, to get your point, we talked before, and I think Andrew Rutledge and the team talked about, is the price elasticity. So the more they go up, the less money we get into actually.
Yeah, I realise that, but I do think it's important to have the actual fact of what what the subsidy that we are supplying, because if you look at the pools, for instance, nationally there's a learn to swim, because we are a series of islands and rivers So drowning is an issue. So is that going to be a core
There's
service?
quite a good, maybe what we could do is get circulated the paper, because it's a really good one which says you've got all these fixed costs across your libraries and your pools. The objective is to get as many people through the door as possible. If you take it too high, you'll start eating away and then losing money on your fixed costs as well.
The difference between libraries and pools, for instance, libraries have 3D printers and overlockers. What is great for social value and societal, but what's the government? What should we be asking them? What we are allowed to provide for our communities?
Okay. All right, Tyler.
Additionally, that's our interpretation of that, though, isn't it? Because you could argue that overlocker actually can benefit economic development eventually if someone needs to sew on that. So that's our interpretation.
Swimming will save your life.
Okay, cool. So let's go to Tyler.
Hey guys, just want to bring it back a bit more high level now.
Hang on, guys. Can we just one person at a time?
Yeah, I just want to bring it back a bit more high level now. So it was good that you elaborated and talked about the cuts within sports and rec, what that would look like. I do want to note the non-core services which the government has sort of talked about, and that includes economic development, events, arts and culture, community development like pools, sports and rec, some environmental programs depending on what it is, and corporate and back office stuff. So the question I've got is actually, it may come up in the submission, is has there been any direction from the government around them backfilling some of those non-core services and taking those in?
No, there's been no direction to date. The rates capping documentation that we have received to date makes no reference to core or non-core services.
Okay, so that's a completely different policy matter when we're referring to the rates cap.
I wouldn't say it's a completely separate matter. The central government in previous releases has talked about rates capping in the context of back to basics and core services. It's just in the current documentation that we've received on rates capping, there has been no mention of core or non-core services.
Okay, I'll wait for the submissions part. Thank you.
It's a good point, Tyler. And I think I was just asking Mary, I'm sure we did a submission, might have been earlier this year, around saying, hey, if you don't want us to do this stuff, that's fine. Or if you that's fine, but you do it and you pay for it. Yeah. So, and that's your point, isn't it? So, yep, cool. Okay, Kelly.
Thanks, Mitch. Just in terms of that table up there, so just trying to understand it. So if we reduce CapEx by 18 million a year,
so that's OPEX there.
No, OPEX. Sorry, I always say that for some reason. So essentially, if we reduce OPEX by $18 million in that first year and bake those savings in, we'll be in. So essentially, we'll be sweet, right?
In that first year, yes, that would reduce the requirement in that second year, which is 33 million, down by 18 million. There would still be that additional rates to collect.
So we'd have to find another 18 as well.
Correct.
Okay, different from the first 18.
Another 15 million.
Yes. Okay. Yeah, no, that's good. Now I really understand.
All right. Do you want to? So, anyone got anything else on that? I think we're good. So, do you want to keep moving?
I will invite Tom up to run through the submission process and key facts around that.
All right, thank you very much. So I'm going to change tack slightly and talk about the consultation and submission on this that the government is running. So consultation is open until the 4th of February. The consultation is targeted, so this is not a public consultation. The public don't get an opportunity on the current consultation to submit to the government. Also, the stakeholders that are being asked to submit are, as I understand, relatively limited. There's also, just to note, there is limited information available for us to engage with at this stage. So we know that an independent reference group of 5 people led by economist Cameron Baggery advised the government on this rates cap policy, but we have nearly no analysis from this group that's been released publicly. There's also no discussion document, no policy paper, no draft legislation. So we haven't actually seen any of the working that has gone into the policy or what the other options are that the government have considered. What we are working with is essentially a 1.5 page summary and a press conference. So for a policy with such significant implications for councils and ratepayers across the country, this is, I think, quite disappointing. The lack of information and analysis does make it hard for us to do our analysis that they're asking us to give feedback on in this consultation. So what is it that they are asking us to consider in this consultation? It's quite a narrow scope of consultation questions. There are 5 questions that essentially focus on whether we agree with the methodology that they've used to determine the rates cap and what we think the impact of the policy might be. And I'll talk about these consultation questions in a moment. Just to go over the key points of the policy that the government are asking about in the consultation. So obviously we know that the target range for the rates increase is 2 to 4%. The Minister says this balances affordability for ratepayers while ensuring councils can maintain services and afford expansion. So how did the government come up with this? The minimum of 2% is based on the midpoint of the Reserve Bank's inflation target. So that inflation target is 1 to 3%. And this, as we've discussed, is a CPI-based measure. As you know, CPI measures general inflations using a basket of goods for households. So this includes everything like fruit and veggies, meat, drinks, alcohol, cigarettes, accommodation, and council rates. The government considers that the 2% figure is enough to maintain council standards and is a good long-run guide for sustainable council revenue growth. In terms of the maximum of 4%, this is the top end range is to allow to manage growth over the long term. The government considers that demand for council services aligns with rises in GDP. So the assumption is that as national GDP grows, the demand for council services grow at roughly the same rate. The government has said that nominal GDP grows at about 5.4% per annum on average. So when you take that number and then you account for an increase in the number of ratepayers through growth, which they have used an equation using proxies to work that out to do with population levels, household formations and new dwellings. This takes away about 1 to 1.5% of per year off that GDP figure. And then also when you take away productivity gains from this figure as well, which is about 0.3%, you end up with roughly 4% to manage growth. And that is how they have come to the maximum end of the band. So the consultation questions, as I said, there are 5 questions that the consultation is asking us to respond to. I'll run through each of the 5 questions and what a proposed response could be. But at the end of the presentation, if you have any feedback on these responses, that would be useful for drafting the submission. So question 1 is, do you agree with the proposed economic indicators to be included in a formula for setting a rates target? So we have some concerns with the methodology that is being used. For example, using CPI as a measure for council inflation. The CPI, or basket of goods approach, is not the best reflection for council costs and inflation. We pay for things like construction, digging up roads, laying pipes, building facilities, whereas the CPI measures average household consumer prices. We think that the band of 2 to 4% won't always account for changes or increases in inflation that might happen. The government has said that once implemented, the target range will be reviewed every 3 years. We wonder if this is adequate enough through periods of high inflation. Also, using national GDP as a proxy for council growth is quite an assumption to make. Every council is different. Some councils are rural, some are urban, some are growing fast, others are not growing at all. So using an average of the national nominal GDP growth is unlikely to reflect these differences and is a rather blunt measure that might not be accurate for some cities or districts. So it is an assumption to say that demand for council's services aligns like for like with GDP. GDP growth is also estimated on average to be 5.4%. It's not clear what time frame this has been calculated over, but we do know that GDP can ebb and flow. GDP growth recently has been rather flat and lower than 5.4% over the last decade. But at the same time, Christchurch has experienced relatively high growth, and so this situation does make us question whether this is the best measure for council growth. But as I said earlier, we don't have a lot of the information and analysis available on this, so it does make it hard for us to be confident in the model that they are using. But it does seem like CPI and GDP are not the best reflections for what is driving rates growth. For question 2, that one asks, if not, so if you don't agree with the indicators, what economic indicators do you suggest and why? Does setting the minimum of the target in line with inflation ensure that councils can maintain service standards? So we can't say for sure that 2% minimum ensures that we can maintain our service standards. So as you have just heard, this minimum would require significant savings. We also note that our preferred and the more relevant measure for local government inflation is produced by Burl, which has been mentioned. We're also curious that the government hasn't considered other indexes such as the capital goods price index. This index, for instance, is produced by Stats and measures the price changes for capital assets produced by purchasers and seems more relevant for local government investment because we invest in things like network infrastructure and buildings. So the capital goods price index measures the price change for things like land, buildings, roads, bridges, pipes, plant and machinery. Interestingly, research done by Infometrics last year showed that when using this measure, the cost of civil construction was obviously higher than CPI. So for example, in their research in the 3 years leading up to 2023, CPI rose by about 19%, but the cost of building bridges rose 38%, sewers 30%, and roads and water supply were 27% more expensive. Moving on to the final 3 questions. So question 3 is, does the maximum of the target for council spending on account for council spending on core services? So again, at this stage, we can't guarantee that the 4% maximum accounts for spending on core services, as significant savings, again, will be required to make this target, and also noting that these decisions haven't been made yet. That leads quite well into question 4, which they are asking us, which is what council spending will not be able to take place under a rates cap. Essentially, decisions about this are going to come later, and it will be a decision of the council, and so we can't really at this stage answer that question. And finally, the 5th question is, are changes to the target needed to account for variations between regions and councils? What changes do you propose and why? So we think that this is probably a good idea. Different councils have different profiles and have different needs. Some councils are growing faster than others. Some have lots of old assets that need renewing, some don't. Councils have different risks, such as environmental risks or financial risks. So this one-size-fits-all method is quite a blunt approach and unlikely to work well for all councils. So the other 5 questions that they are asking in the consultation, you may want to also take the opportunity to raise some other points. And on the slide at the moment, some of the other points about rates caps that have been raised previously by council was discussed in things such as the recent submission on the Local Government System Improvements Amendment Bill. So these briefly are stating that our council doesn't lack fiscal discipline. We might also want to note that there are risks around rates caps. This limits a key source of revenue, as we know. It is possible that there is asset decay and underinvestment with rates caps. It does make it difficult to close any investment deficit in infrastructure. And we could also refer to the experiences of overseas, such as in Australia and the UK. Other things that we have mentioned before is that the council will likely need to investigate new sources of revenue funding, so whether that be fees, user pay systems, accessing more debt, introducing levies. We'll have to consider those. And finally, that other government assistance would be welcome. So the Crown could pay rates, the Crown could remove GST from rates or share the GST from rates. So without these other types of measures, it does make it more difficult for councils. Just finally, 2 slides here on the submission process. So we're talking to you today, and then we'll get drafting underway after this meeting. And so given the holiday break, there is quite a quick turnaround on this one. We plan to come back to council on a workshop on the 20th of January, which I think is your first week back as councillors, with our draft submission. We will then look to finalise it on the 4th of February and submit it on the same day. And here are the next steps more broadly. So those top 3 bullet points is what I just mentioned, aiming for that 4th of February timeframe. But just to also note that there will be more cabinet decisions on the detailed elements of rates capping in early to mid 2026. The expectation is that there will be the rates cap legislation introduced in mid 2026 before the general election. This would mean legislation will be passed in 2027, and as Mitch has already said, this would come fully into effect in 2029. That's it, thanks.
Hey, thank you for that. That's really, it's been useful to understand where we're sort of going with it and what sits in behind it. Got a few questions, and we are going to have a break in 15 at 12:15. So we've got Andre, then Tyler, Pauline, Nathaniel, and Victoria.
Thank you. Could I suggest that any submission makes mention of central government imposed costs? So, for example, last year we had a 0.2%-ish on water regulator charges. So I guess the question to ask is, does government reserve the right to impose more costs between now and 2028 when we're trying to plan for a rates increase? Then if they does the rates cap include central government imposed costs? So I guess that's something that really needs to be clarified as part of this process, and our submission should make mention of it. Yeah, it's citing an example. There we go. Thank you.
In regards to the question 1, for your proposed response, I'm wondering if we could bolster it, give it a bit more weight. Question 2 obviously answers that, which is great. I think that the recommendations that you had in terms of adding to the submission were absolutely phenomenal. Thanks for that. But the question 3 and 4, if we refer to 3 and 4 here, I know that this is governance here in regards to question 3, but I'm wondering, you're saying that you can't get the information, but based off the modelling that we just had, we do have information around some modelling. Would that be able to be melted into the submission?
We can use some of that modelling into us, probably into our submission if you like. Yeah, what the response to 3 and 4 is essentially getting at is that there are still decisions to be made around what it is that, or how we will fit the new budget essentially, and what those decisions are going to be. So that's just sort of referring to that.
And there's one big fish that we're missing here, which is around the potential of unitary or super city councils, and the imposed costs that would probably have if we look at Auckland, for example. What's the timeline look like that when these are taking place at the same time?
So the rates cap, so the end point potentially from what the government has announced on both these fronts is roughly the same, which is that 2029. So the implementation of a rates cap, as sort of Mitch outlined, we have to between now and then get there, and that would happen over the same time frame as potentially what the government has announced in terms of the original government reforms.
So we could be looking at tens of millions of dollars to create a unitary or super city council at the same time as the rates cap is supposed to be coming into play.
It's potentially.
I think that there needs to be consideration for that around, obviously, as Andre was alluding to, around the imposed government reforms and the costs that councils are going to have to bear, because that is a significant one. Because if we do have to pay for the unitary or super city, then we're going to have to cut more core services, because the non-core obviously are something that's not even taking a dent into that 4% rates cap.
I had a feeling, and I don't know if it's this or the RMA stuff, that government are going to fund it. So I could be wrong.
Oh,
but
we'll find out at lunchtime. Eh?
Yeah, it might be the RMA. It was one of them they're going to fund. So
because that is very significant.
Then I mean, if we can model, taking 4 councils down to 1, that's going to be a significant overhead reduction as well. So we need to factor that in.
Of course.
Based on Auckland and Auckland's response to our comment is that the cost is in their transition, but longer term you find the savings. So that was but that's...
There could be some alleviances given based off of the restructure. We don't know. But just maybe alluding to some policy change would be really cool. But I think that you guys are going to do a great job. Trust you. Thanks heaps.
I think it's me. Similar to Tyler, and I totally support Andre's comments around unfunded mandates and not built in here. So question 4, I think we could put some detail in there. For instance, we clearly know it would affect our rating for renewal program. So that's a program we've got in place with a finish line at 2032, and it would very highly affect that. And I think also the risk of our Standard & Poor's credit downgrade, which would cost us. And I think we should put examples in so that they know. And I'm wondering if we can actually perhaps build in, when you do that unfunded mandate section, that maybe the cost of PC 14 in there was enormous. There'll be more to come, and that would be a great example. And also, could we get a rough figure on the cost of all these submissions that we've done over even the last, 2-3 years? Must be phenomenal. Have they taken that into account? I just think it's like, to me, they don't seem to have an understanding of local government that, 93% of our work is core services and water and pipes, roading, but the remainder, that they've got to get a concept of these additional costs that we cannot avoid paying, like unfunded mandates. They need to have an idea of that. So I do think we should be putting examples in. Not too wordy, just bullet points so they don't skip over it.
Cool. So a few quick ones. So is the submission that we end up giving to government, is that going to be public, or will that be that'll be open public submission? Great. So for the question number 3, it would be good if we were to include pushing for clarification in that we would want this to be an existing ratepayer cap and not a nominal cap, because that growth issue. And then kind of related to what Tyler said on number 4, if I don't know if this is realistic, fair enough if it's not, but if we could get a ballpark of the cost of all of the non-core, as you defined earlier, sort of the non-core services that we provide, and comparing that cost to that $200 million budget hole with the 2% or something like that. So we're sort of comparing the actual cost of the non-core services with the savings we're required to make for question 4. And then on the sort of number 5, I think it was the different councils being treated a bit differently depending on circumstance. I thought it would be good if we included something around the value within a rating area of the non-rate paying buildings, like the government buildings and the university buildings, and how that needs to be taken into account when the rates cap is calculated. Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, I mean, I support the idea of giving examples. So, under 4 and number 5, I think we should be saying to just get our core services back to the day they were before the earthquake. I think we've got an 83-year target now for roading. If the rate caps comes in, that'll probably blow up to 200 or 300 years. So I think giving real life examples around the challenges that we face, and I think that ties into 5 as well. Changes to the target needed to account for variations between regions and council. What changes do you propose and why? Absolutely. We had a significant earthquake. We've got significant infrastructure damage. We're working hard to fix it. It's certainly a case, I think, for some variation. So, yeah. I know in our infrastructure strategy we tried to pull out some of that high level data. So the more data we can get around that, I think the more persuasive our argument will be to central government.
I like your comments, and you could use capital letters and bold print if you like to say council does not lack fiscal discipline, because I think we're actually sick of being insulted as well. But what is our view here? Are we actually support, as a council, are we supporting a cap but not this one, or do we not want any cap at all? We want the freedom. So do we have a view, or do we want to have a view on that?
Well, I think we'd want to.
I think we'll come back with the draft submission, get some indication then, because I think
we might have to do 2 submissions.
Yeah, well, that's sort of where I'm coming at, because I mean, obviously we can see that the 4 is not particularly going to work for us. Do we want to pick another number? Do we want some advice on what that number could be that we could operate under, or do we want flexibility? And I think that's a question we need to ask.
Yeah, and I think you probably need a bit more time to debate that round the table, because you're sort of out of time.
I think
now.
the bigger question is, what is central government and government's opinion of local government's fiscal abilities to balance the books? Because why are they looking at the rates cap? Find out the fundamental of what the difference is between central government's illusion, or whatever you want to call it, of local government and our fiscal responsibilities, and what their perception of communities are. I think that's the fundamental question, because at the moment it seems to me, and if you looked at it, they would feel that we have no vision or responsibility of levels of spend. We're just throwing money everywhere. And this is from, yeah, it is. It's, so what is the assumption? Where does it come from? What's the reality? Because if you're going to go government, look at Parakiuri.
The other, fair point. The other things I'd be keen to see is some stuff around, like, if we say, hey, look, if we, and I think you're right, I think we'd have to consult the pub. I genuinely think we'd have to talk to the community if we offered a view that we didn't support or we did support the rates cap. So I think we might be able to just answer the questions. But I'd be keen to have something in there around, and it's a bit to your point around the unfunded mandate stuff, but it's actually the regulatory stuff that ties up millions and millions and millions of dollars a year in unproductive work that we have to do, and that we don't have any discretion around to go, actually, it's not material for the organisation, we still need to do pieces of work. So I think if we could go with some other things that say, look, we'll attempt to, we'll answer your questions, but we need you to work with us to help reduce some of the red tape barriers that we get really frustrated about, and that literally just have people employed constantly to work for. We may get some of that at 1 o'clock, but we might get, but there'll be more. I've got no doubt there'll be more. The other thing I wondered, and it'd be cool just to bring it back, and whether we consider putting in the submission, would just be our sort of rating per capita, or however we want to frame it, compared to the other metros across the country, so that we can go, actually, guys, we run surpluses, we kind of are responsible in how we manage it, and as a result our per capita is sitting at this, and kind of just demonstrate that because we do know what we're doing, it's, yeah.
Rate we struck last year, was under 5% in real terms without Te Kaha, so actually we're not far off the mark.
So I think that'd be good if we could factor that in. That'd be really good. But I think we've probably landed about where we need to now, and we'll come back at 1:15. That suits. Thank you, team. That was great.